So I'm sure by now we've all seen that Errol Spence training video. Now, it's a video of him hitting pads in the gym, doing some shadow boxing, like mostly hitting the pads. And he's planning a comeback. He's planning a comeback at 154 from what it sounds like. Doesn't look like he's going to be making 147 again after that Crawford fight, after his most recent fight, which I guess it makes sense. It happens. You may have decided after that fight that, that was one fight too many at 147 and it's time for him to make that move up and campaign at 154. And to be fair, 154 is not really for the taking. It's not, because once you get to those guys at the world level, I do fancy them to beat the brakes off of Errol Spence. But I wanted to talk about that video. Now, we don't know when that video was taken. We don't know how long he'd been training at that point as well. So this may not be a super up-to-date video of Errol Spence. To be honest, I reckon it probably is. But he looks awful in that video. He looks awful. He looks ploddy. And he always was that sort of fighter, to be fair. But he looks slower, looks clumsier. And again, he was all of these things before. He was, but it feels like age and ring rust, potentially some injuries, having a crazy car crash. Obviously, all these things play a factor. And as you get older, these things don't get better, right? So as you get older, you're going to get slower. You are. So it's about adjusting your style to essentially making your body last as long as you can when you're in that ring. And looking at that clip, it would be tough to see Errol Spence come back to the top guys at 154. Now, could Errol Spence beat a couple of guys outside the top 15, 20, 30 at 154? 100%. He's still Errol Spence Jr. He's still a guy with a ton of punching power. He showed that at 147. And he does feel like the type of boxer, because he's really good with body punches as well. He does feel like the sort of boxer that power would translate to another weight division. But granted, we don't know until we know. But that was part of his game plan as well, being that big body puncher. He was a real problem, And yeah, Errol Spence Jr. was really able to master the ability of committing big to the body in the effort to then lower your hands and then rip those devastating headshots and get you out of there, right? And I think he could do the same to a lot of guys at 154, specifically guys outside the top 10, top 15. In my opinion, I think Errol Spence is going to have to ease his way back in a bit. And that being said, Errol Spence doesn't even necessarily need a world title fight to be on the line for him to be a big money fight, because I think Errol Spence is still largely a name that people remember. I know he's not been in the ring for a while, but I think he's still able to sell a decent amount of tickets, and against an opponent with a bit of build-up as well, you could be looking at a potentially quite a big money fight. And that doesn't necessarily have to be for a world championship, right? If you think about it, it doesn't necessarily have to be for a world championship. Now, you look at the top guys at 154 now. Of course, your Virgil Ortizes, your Madramovs, your Fondoras, your Murtazaliyevs. I think all these guys would beat Errol Spence, and I think they do it, relatively easy, if I'm being honest, at this point in Errol Spence's career. But you look at the tier below that in terms of guys like, I don't know, at 154, Tim Zhu, Keith Thurman, some other guys, I'm drawing a blank at the moment, Josh Kelly, these sorts of guys that are sort of fringe world level at this point. I think those guys probably beat Errol Spence too as well, if I'm being honest. But again, they're probably competitive fights. I think Errol Spence doesn't just completely fold as soon as he gets in there. I think he offers some resistance and uses that IQ and that experience, because he's been at world level for a long time now. Of course, he's not been at 154, but still, he's still got that experience over the likes of a Josh Kelly, for example. Right? But yeah, I'd be curious to know what you guys think of Errol Spence making a comeback. Do you think he could potentially do it? Do you think he'd be successful? Do you think there's anyone at the top level, 154, that he could beat? I'd be super curious to know what you guys think in the comments below. Let me know, and I'm out. Peace.